My name is Chloe. I am 25 years old now, but the night my life finally split in two, I was 17. I was sitting at the far end of our polished oak dining table, trying to make myself as small and quiet as the extra fork no one used. The air in the dining room of our sprawling suburban villa was thick and suffocating. It smelled of expensive citrus candles and old money. Heavy crystal glasses chimed against each other as guests toasted to prosperity. My mother had decided to throw what she called a milestone celebration dinner. The reason for the party was twofold. First, my father Richard had just hit a record revenue target with his company. Second, my younger brother Austin had been accepted into an exclusive private school with tuition fees that could buy a small house. The house buzzed with adults in designer clothes. They held tall glasses of vintage wine and talked about investments and summer vacations in Europe. My job was to refill the wine glasses and collect the empty plates. My mother, Patricia, moved through the room like a hostess in a television commercial. She kissed cheeks and laughed too loudly. She was always one joke away from being mean. She was not drunk yet, but I knew the signs. I saw the way her hand stayed a beat too long on the arm of a wealthy guest. I saw the way her smile sharpened at the edges like a blade. My father kept checking his phone for congratulatory emails. He laughed a little too hard at every compliment thrown his way. They were performing success, and I was the misprint in the brochure. I sat there with my hand in my pocket. My fingers traced the sharp edge of a letter I had received that afternoon. It was an acceptance letter from a state university with a partial scholarship. It was my ticket out. But that news did not earn a banner over the fireplace. It sat folded in my pocket like a dirty secret no one asked to hear. Halfway through dessert, my mother Patricia tapped her spoon against her wine glass. The sharp clinking sound cut through the chatter. The room hushed instantly. Cameras came out. Everyone expected another speech about how hard they had worked to build this perfect life. My mother stood up. She walked around the table and stood directly behind my chair. Her fingers rested on my shoulders. It looked like a hug to the audience, but I felt her fingers dig into my skin like claws. "I just have to show you all our pride and joy," she announced. Her voice was dripping with a sweetness that made my stomach turn. My muscles tightened. I stared at the red wine ring someone had left on the white tablecloth near my plate. "And this," she said, giving me a little shake, "is our daughter." She paused to let the anticipation build. Her eyes glittered with malice. "Our family mistake. The 1% risk that we wish we had deleted." For a second, no one moved. The silence was absolute. Then someone snorted. Then the laughter rolled across the table like a wave. It crashed over me. Phones lifted higher. A camera flash went off in my face. My father pointed his fork at me from across the table. He smirked. "She is the one bad debt I wish I could write off from my balance sheet," he added. More laughter erupted. Someone actually wiped tears from their eyes because it was apparently hilarious to call a teenage girl a mistake in her own home. My brother Austin pulled out his phone. He laughed as he hit record. He was capturing my humiliation for his social media story. I heard my heart pounding in my ears. It was louder than the jokes. I realized this was not new. It was just the first time they had said it so clearly with an audience. They had been rehearsing for this moment for years. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the hardwood floor. The harsh sound cut through the laughter. My mother's fingers tightened on my shoulders. "Oh, come on, Chloe," she said. Her voice dripped with mock concern. "Don't be so sensitive. It is just a joke." "You know we love you," my father added. He spoke as if love and public humiliation could share the same sentence. I stood up anyway. I shook my mother's hand off my shoulder. "I am not laughing," I said. My voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. I looked at the faces around the table. They were waiting for me to cry or to storm off so they could call me dramatic. I did neither. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out the scholarship letter. I pulled out my house key. It was a heavy brass key on a simple ring. I set it down on the table with a deliberate click right next to the $500 bottle of wine my mother had been bragging about all night. I looked straight at them. I looked at my mother, who was still smiling her shark smile. I looked at my father, who was already reaching for the breadbasket. I looked at Austin, who was still filming. "You are going to regret saying that out loud," I said. It was not a shout. It was not a tearful plea. It was a promise. My mother's face twisted with annoyance rather than fear. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "Where do you think you are going to go?" My father chuckled. "You will cool off and be back by morning," he said. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I turned around. I walked out of the dining room. I walked past the framed photos where I was always slightly out of focus. I went into the hall and grabbed my backpack. It contained 3 shirts and my sketchbook, and $42 I had been hiding in a shoebox. I opened the front door and stepped into the humid night. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I could still hear the sound of their laughter ringing through the house. They had no idea that was the sound of their perfect life beginning to crack. The bus station in New Orleans smelled like burned coffee and industrial bleach, but to me, it smelled like consequences. I stepped off the Greyhound with my backpack heavy on my shoulders. I counted my cash again. $42. That was it. That was the price of my dignity. Back at the villa, my mother was probably sipping vintage wine that cost more than my entire net worth. I found the cheapest hostel with a vacancy. It cost $12 a night for a top bunk in a room that smelled of damp socks and stale smoke. That gave me 3 days to figure out how not to sink. I lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling fan wobbling overhead. I did not cry. Crying burned calories, and I could not afford to waste energy. The next morning, I walked until my heels blistered inside my cheap sneakers. I followed every help-wanted sign I saw. Most managers took one look at my overstuffed backpack and the dark circles under my eyes and shook their heads. "We need someone with experience," they said. "We are not hiring drifters. Come back when you have a local address." By late afternoon, hunger was not just a sensation. It was a physical presence. It clawed at my stomach and made my hands tremble. My pride was running on fumes. I pushed open the door to a corner diner more out of desperation than hope. Inside, it was a sensory assault of frying oil and clattering plates. The red vinyl booths were cracked and taped over with duct tape. The chrome stools were dull from years of use. A guy about my age slid past me carrying 3 plates on one arm. He had messy dark hair and a stain on his shirt. He looked like he was holding the entire place together with sheer will. I walked up to the counter. A woman with tired eyes was ringing up a customer. I cleared my throat. "Are you hiring?" I asked. She looked me over. She took in my sweaty clothes and the way I swayed slightly from exhaustion. "You ever wait tables?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "But I learn fast. I need work. I will take any shift you have." The guy with the plates glanced over. He smirked. "She has that no backup plan energy," he said to the woman. "That is useful." The woman snorted. "We pay minimum wage plus tips. It is not glamorous." "Neither is sleeping on a bench," I said. For the first time in 24 hours, someone laughed with me, not at me. She tossed me a stained apron. "Name is Mike," the guy said, coming back to the counter. "Start with clearing tables. If you survive the lunch rush, we will talk." I survived. But survival was ugly. I learned quickly that hunger makes you an animal. While clearing a booth in the back corner, I saw a plate with half a grilled cheese sandwich left on it. The customer had barely touched it. My stomach roared so loud I thought the room could hear it. I looked around. No one was watching. I took the plate to the dish pit. Instead of scraping it into the trash, I shoved the cold, greasy bread into my mouth. I swallowed it whole without chewing. It tasted like shame and salvation. That night, Mike handed me $20 in cash from the tip jar. It was off the books. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "You are not terrible." I walked back to the hostel, clutching that bill like it was a winning lottery ticket. My family thought I was a mistake. But as I washed the grease off my hands in the hostel sink, I realized something. Mistakes get erased. I was not going to be erased. I was going to eat their doubt and let it fuel me. 6 months after I walked out of that dining room, I hit rock bottom. It was a freezing November night, and the heating in the hostel had broken 3 days ago. I lay curled in a ball on my top bunk, shaking violently under a thin wool blanket. My chest felt like someone had filled my lungs with broken glass. I had a rattling cough that tasted like copper and a fever that made the room spin in sickening circles. I had severe pneumonia. I had no health insurance. I had exactly $19 left in my pocket after paying for my bed. The fever stripped away my pride. I stared at my cheap secondhand phone with blurry vision. I was 17 years old, and I was terrified. All I wanted was a warm bed and a doctor. I pulled up my father's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. I told myself that if I begged them, they might let me come home. I was ready to apologize for being born, just to stop the shivering. Before I hit the green button, I opened Instagram. I used a fake account with no profile picture to check on them. A new post from my mother, Patricia, popped up at the top of the feed. The photo was blindingly bright. It showed Patricia and my brother Austin standing on a pristine white dock over turquoise water. They were holding coconut drinks and smiling wider than I had ever seen them smile. The location tag read, 5-star luxury resort Maldives. I read the caption. It hit me harder than the fever. The best vacation ever now that the house is finally clean of trash. Blessed. No mistakes. The air left my lungs. Trash. That was what I was to them. I was not a daughter who was missing. I was garbage they were relieved to have thrown out. Something inside me snapped. The pathetic desire to beg for help evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a cold, white-hot rage that burned hotter than my fever. I screamed. I threw the phone across the room with every ounce of strength I had left. It hit the concrete wall with a satisfying crunch and shattered into plastic shrapnel. My lifeline was gone. Good. I sat up. The dizziness was still there, but now I had adrenaline coursing through my veins. I made a vow to the empty room. I would never go back there as a beggar. I would only go back when I could buy their entire lives and evict them from it. I needed to do something with the energy vibrating under my skin. I grabbed a black marker from my bag. I had no paper left, so I dragged a greasy cardboard pizza box out of the trash bin next to my bed. I tore the lid off and started to draw. I did not draw pretty gowns. I drew jagged lines. I drew silhouettes that looked like weapons. I drew collars that stood up like spikes and jackets that looked like armor. I poured my fever and my hatred onto the cardboard. For the first time, I was not designing clothes to please people. I was designing armor for a war. 4 years blurred into a haze of caffeine and needle pricks. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay for fabric and tuition. Mike was my anchor. He brought me leftover sandwiches when I forgot to eat. He held my hand when the exhaustion made my hands shake too much to thread a needle. He never asked why I was running so hard. He just made sure I did not collapse on the track. My hard work culminated in a local design competition during my senior year. I submitted a collection called Armor. It was not delicate or pretty. It was visceral. I used heavy wool and metal clasps to create silhouettes that looked like they could deflect a bullet. The judges called it disturbing, but undeniable. I won first place. For the first time, a small spotlight found me. I gave an interview to a local fashion blog where I mentioned that my designs were inspired by the feeling of being an unwanted guest in your own home. I never used names. I never mentioned the villa or the wine or the word mistake. 2 days after the interview, a courier arrived at the diner. He handed me a thick envelope. I thought it might be a job offer or a sponsorship. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was on heavy cream paper with a letterhead that smelled of money. The law offices of Sterling and Associates. I read the first line. We represent Mr. Richard and Mrs. Patricia regarding the matter of defamation of character. My stomach dropped. They were not writing to congratulate me. They were writing to silence me. The letter demanded that I immediately cease and desist all public statements regarding my family history. It claimed I was damaging their reputation and causing emotional distress. It threatened a lawsuit for damages if I did not retract my interview and sign a non-disclosure agreement. They were trying to bury me. They wanted me to understand that without them, I was nothing but a liability they could legally liquidate. They thought fear would send me crawling back into the shadows. Mike read the letter over my shoulder. His jaw tightened. This is insane, he said. You did not even say who they were. I know, I said, but they know, and that is why they are terrified. I looked at the legal threat. The words cease and desist were bolded in the center of the page. Richard and Patricia had just handed me the greatest weapon I could have asked for. They wanted me to hide this ugliness. Instead, I decided to wear it. I took the letter to the university digital lab. I scanned the document at the highest resolution possible. I blew up the text until the aggressive legal jargon became a chaotic, abstract pattern. I printed the image onto 3 yards of heavy white silk organza. For my final graduation runway show, I created a gown made entirely of their threats. The bodice was structured like a corset made of the firm letterhead. The skirt billowed out in layers of sheer silk, printed with the words defamation and liability and damages repeating over and over again like a chant. The night of the show, the auditorium was packed. When my model stepped onto the runway, the lights hit the fabric. At first, the audience just saw a striking black and white print. Then as she walked closer, they began to read. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones snapped photos. The dress was not just clothing, it was a public indictment. By the next morning, the image of the cease and desist dress was viral. Social media outlets picked it up. They called me the designer who wears her pain. The irony was perfect. Richard and Patricia had spent thousands of dollars on lawyers to shut me up. Instead, their legal threat launched my career. I received requests for interviews and custom orders. My inbox was full. My family remained silent. There were no more letters, no phone calls, but I knew they were watching. I could feel their anger radiating from the screen every time my name trended. They had tried to crush me with their power, but they forgot one thing. Pressure creates diamonds. 8 years had passed since I left my house key on the dining table next to a bottle of wine I could not afford. That key belonged to a frightened teenager, but the hand that held my phone now belonged to a woman who built an empire out of rejection. I was 25 years old. My brand 1% was not just a label. It was a statement. My studio in the city was sleek and cold and entirely mine. I was reviewing the sketches for the autumn collection when my phone lit up on the glass desk. The screen displayed a name I had not spoken aloud in nearly a decade. Austin. I stared at the device. My finger hovered over the decline button. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but satisfaction is addictive. I slid my finger across the screen and put the phone to my ear. "Hello, Austin," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of someone who had nothing to lose. "Chloe." His voice cracked on the second syllable. He sounded rough. There was no trace of the arrogant golden boy who had filmed my humiliation for his friends to laugh at. He sounded like a child who had woken up in a burning house. "What do you want?" I asked. "It is bad, Chloe." He took a ragged breath. "Mom and Dad are finished. It is all gone. The business, the investments, everything. The bank is at the house right now sealing the doors. They are changing the locks." I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not sorrow. It was the click of a puzzle piece finally falling into place. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "You all made it very clear that I was the mistake you wanted to erase. Dad told me to call," Austin whispered. "He says you are the only one who can save the honor of this family. He says you have the money and the reputation to fix this before the news breaks." The audacity was breathtaking. They had branded me a liability when I was poor, but now that I was an asset, they wanted to claim me again. They wanted my success to wash away their failure. I did not feel pity. I did not feel the urge to be the hero. I felt like a hunter who had waited in the brush for 8 years and just watched the prey step directly into the snare. "Tell Richard I got the message," I said. "So you will help us?" Austin asked. His voice lifted with pathetic hope. "You will save the house." I stood up and smoothed the fabric of my blazer. It was one of my own designs. The lining was embroidered with silver thread that spelled out, "Not your mistake." "I will come home, Austin," I said. "But do not get confused. I am not coming to save you. I am coming to watch." I hung up before he could answer. I grabbed my car keys. It was time to go back to the scene of the crime, not as a victim, but as the executioner. Before I put the car in drive, I made one phone call. I dialed Morgan. She was the girl who had sat next to me in design history class and drawn skulls on her syllabus. Now she ran a boutique cybersecurity firm that specialized in finding things rich people wanted to keep hidden. "Find me everything on Richard," I said. "I want bank statements. I want tax returns. I want to know where the bodies are buried." "Give me 20 minutes, Morgan said. I sat in the silence of my leather interior and waited. When the email arrived, it was a heavy PDF file titled The Receipts. I scrolled through the pages on my tablet. The financial rot was worse than Austin had admitted. Richard was not just a bad businessman. He was a criminal. The document showed he had been embezzling funds from his own employees' pension plans for 5 years to cover his gambling debts. He had evaded federal taxes since I left home. Then I found the knife in the heart. I scrolled to the section marked Education Trust. This was the money my grandmother had left for me. For 8 years, Richard had told me the market crash wiped it out. He had looked me in the eye and lied without blinking. The transaction log told a different story. The balance of $85,000 had been withdrawn in a single lump sum on May 12th. I remembered that date perfectly. It was Austin's 18th birthday. The destination of the wire transfer was a luxury dealership. The memo line read, "Porsche 911, happy birthday, son." The air in the car suddenly felt thin. They had not lost my money. They had stolen it. While I was scrubbing grease off diner tables to pay for community college tuition, my brother was driving my future around town in a sports car. They had literally liquidated my education to buy him a toy. I did not scream. The anger that rose in my throat was cold and solid like a stone. I printed the entire file on my portable printer in the passenger seat. Then I opened my laptop and finalized a different document. It was not a check. It was a binding legal agreement with terms so harsh it was essentially a slave contract. I placed the evidence and the contract into a crisp black folder. I started the engine. I was driving back to the house that had rejected me. But this time I was not bringing an olive branch. I was bringing a noose. I parked my car a block away and walked the rest of the distance. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. The house that had been the backdrop of every perfect family photo looked smaller than I remembered. The lawn was overgrown with weeds that choked the dying rose bushes. Paint was peeling from the porch railing in long gray strips. A foreclosure notice was taped crookedly to the front door like a badge of shame. For years, this place had been their favorite prop. Now it looked like a movie set nobody bothered to strike after the show closed. I rang the bell. My mother opened the door. For a second, we just stared at each other. Patricia had always been meticulous about her appearance. She used to have her hair blown out and her makeup done before she took the trash out. Now her hair was scraped back into a severe bun and mascara was smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. "Chloe," she breathed. She said my name like it might break in her mouth. Her gaze flicked over my tailored blazer and the sharp heels that cost more than her current car. "Hi, Mom," I said. The word felt strange on my tongue. She stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled stale. The citrus candles and expensive food smells were gone. Piles of unopened mail cluttered the console table. A framed photo of that milestone dinner still sat on a shelf. I was in it, blurred in the background and half turned away. My father stood in the living room. Richard looked thinner. His tie was loosened and his shoulders were slumped. But when he saw me, he straightened his spine. He tried to summon the ghost of the authority he used to wield. "You came," he said. He spoke as if he had summoned a wayward employee rather than a daughter he had discarded. "You asked," I replied. "I was curious what the end of the world looks like from your side of town." Austin was leaning against the doorway. He looked older and more tired than a 26-year-old should be. He gave me a small, guilty smile, but I did not return it. We sat in the living room where I had once been lectured about gratitude. Richard did not offer me water. He did not ask how I was. He reached for a document on the coffee table and slid it across the glass surface toward me. It was a loan guarantee form. "We have found a private lender who is willing to restructure our debt," Richard said. His voice was steady. "But given the current situation with the business lawsuits, they require a guarantor with significant assets." He tapped the signature line with his index finger. "Sign this," he said. "Consider it an opportunity to pay your debts. You ran away and abandoned this family for 8 years. We fed you. We housed you. We tolerated your moods. Now you can finally show some filial piety and make up for the damage you caused by leaving." I stared at him. The audacity was so pure, it was almost impressive. He was gaslighting me in real time. He was trying to reframe his financial ruin as my moral failing. I picked up the paper. I pretended to read it. Then I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that made Patricia flinch. "You think I owe you?" I asked. "We are your parents," Richard snapped. "You owe us everything. We sacrificed our lives to build a legacy for you children. The myth of the noble sacrifice." That was their favorite shield. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the black folder Morgan had compiled. I did not slide it across the table. I threw it. It landed with a heavy thud in front of Richard. The glossy photos of bank statements spilled out. "Drop the act, Richard," I said. My voice was ice cold. "I know about the $2 million in unpaid federal taxes. I know about the embezzlement from your employee pension fund." Richard froze. His face went gray. "But that is just standard white-collar crime," I continued. I leaned forward. "Let us talk about sacrifice." I pointed to a highlighted page on top of the pile. "For 8 years you told me my college trust fund was lost in bad investments. You let me scrub dishes and sleep in a hostel because you said the money was gone." I looked at Austin. He shrank back against the wall. "May 12th, I said. That date rang a bell. It was Austin's 18th birthday. The bank records show a wire transfer of $85,000 from my education trust directly to the Porsche dealership." Patricia let out a small, choked sound. She covered her mouth with her hand. "You did not lose my money," I said. "You stole it. You liquidated my future to buy your golden boy a sports car, and now you have the nerve to ask me to sign a loan to pay for your mistakes." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The legend of their sacrifice had not just cracked. It had shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the dusty living room floor. I thought the confrontation in the living room was the end of the war. I was wrong. Patricia had one more dirty card to play. Desperation makes people dangerous, and my mother decided to weaponize her tears one last time. 2 days after I exposed their theft, Patricia went live on a popular local lifestyle stream. She sat on a beige sofa wearing a modest cardigan she never would have touched a year ago. She looked frail. She looked like a victim. We gave her everything she sobbed into the camera. We mortgaged our home to fund her dreams. We supported her when no one else believed in her. And now that she is a famous millionaire designer, she refuses to help us keep a roof over our heads. She is letting her own parents starve. It breaks a mother's heart to raise a child who turns out so cold. I watched the performance from my hotel room. Morgan was sitting next to me on the bed. She was monitoring the social media engagement. "She is really committing to the role," Morgan said. Her voice was flat. "She is trending locally. People are calling you a monster in the comments. They are saying you should be ashamed of your wealth." I looked at the screen. I looked at the woman who had stolen my education fund to buy a sports car, now begging strangers for sympathy. I did not feel angry. I felt bored. "Do it," I said to Morgan. "Drop the bomb." Morgan smirked. She hit the enter key on her laptop. She uploaded a video file titled "The Real Sacrifice." It was the footage Austin had filmed on his phone 8 years ago. He had sent it to his friends to mock me that night, but Morgan had recovered it from an old server archive. The video played on the screen. It was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed the opulent dining room filled with wealthy guests. It showed the $500 wine. It showed Patricia standing behind a shrinking 17-year-old girl. Then came the line that had haunted me for a decade. "This is our daughter," Patricia said on the video, her face twisted in a cruel smile. "The family mistake, the 1% risk we wish we had deleted." The laughter followed. It was roaring and unfiltered. Then came Richard's voice loud and clear. "She is the one bad debt I wish I could write off. The internet did what the internet does best. It judged." The tide turned instantly. The comments under Patricia's tearful interview shifted from sympathy to pure disgust. She called her own child a mistake, one user wrote. "This is emotional abuse," another commented. "No wonder she left." This woman is a monster. By the evening, the fallout was catastrophic. The clip went viral. It was shared on forums and reaction channels. My parents became the new face of toxic parenting. The few remaining investors in Richard's company pulled out immediately to distance themselves from the scandal. The private lender rescinded the offer to restructure their debt. Even the country club where they held on to their last shred of status sent an email revoking their membership due to conduct unbecoming. They were not just broke anymore, they were pariahs. They had tried to use the court of public opinion to destroy me, but they forgot that the internet never forgets. They had no friends left. They had no allies. They had no way out. The viral storm left my parents with nothing but ash. They sat at the dusty table in the living room and looked like ghosts. Their reputation was destroyed. Their credit was frozen. They were facing potential jail time for the tax fraud I had uncovered. I placed the final document on the table. It was not a check. It was a contract of surrender. "I will pay the immediate tax liens to keep you out of federal prison," I said. "I will cover the interest on the loans, so you do not declare bankruptcy today. But my mercy comes with conditions." Richard reached for the pen, but I pulled the paper back. "Read it first," I said. "You are selling this house immediately. The proceeds go to the creditors. You will move into a 2-bedroom apartment in the industrial district on the edge of town. I have already selected it. It is clean, but it is small. It is the size of life you can actually afford." Patricia sobbed into a tissue. "There is more," I continued. "You need income. I have arranged employment for you. Patricia, you will work the morning shift as a cashier at the discount grocery store on 4th Street. Richard, the warehouse across from your new apartment, needs a night security guard. You start Monday." "A security guard," Richard whispered. His face was pale. "I was a CEO. You were a thief," I corrected him. "Now you are a security guard. It is honest work. You should try it." And finally, I pointed to the last clause. "You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak my name to the press again. You will never mention my brand. You will never claim to be my parents in public. To the world we are strangers." They signed. They had no choice. They signed away their pride to save their freedom. 1 year later, I stood in the front lawn of the villa holding a plastic auction paddle. The bank had seized the property after the sale stalled and put it up for auction. I was the only bidder who mattered. When the auctioneer slammed his gavel down, he did not say "sold to the daughter." He said "sold to the highest bidder." I did not buy a house. I bought a corpse. The first thing I did was hire a demolition crew. I stood in the center of the dining room where they had called me a mistake. The polished oak table was gone. I handed a sledgehammer to Mike. "Do you want to do the honors?" I asked. He smiled. He swung the heavy hammer into the wall. The sound of cracking plaster was the sweetest music I had ever heard. We tore that room down to the studs. We ripped out the heavy curtains and the pretentious chandeliers. We opened the walls to let the light in. I did not rebuild it as a home. I turned it into a sanctuary. I named it the Not a Mistake Foundation. We filled the rooms with sewing machines and drafting tables. We invited teenagers who had been kicked out of their homes or told they were worthless. We gave them fabric and tools and told them to build their own armor. 6 months after the opening, I stood on the master balcony. It was no longer a bedroom, but a shared studio space. Below me, the garden was full of wildflowers instead of manicured roses. Inside the house, the sound of sewing machines hummed like a hive of bees. Mike was down in the courtyard teaching a young boy how to sketch a jacket. I looked toward the front gate. 2 figures were standing on the sidewalk looking through the iron bars. It took me a moment to recognize them. Richard looked old. His hair was white and his shoulders were bent. He was wearing the gray uniform of the security company. Patricia stood next to him in a polyester vest from the grocery store. They looked tired. They looked small. They looked like 2 strangers who had stopped to look at a house they could never afford. They saw me on the balcony. Patricia lifted a hand halfway as if to wave. She looked at the house she used to own and the daughter she used to mock. Her eyes were filled with a terrible longing. I did not wave back. I did not feel a spike of anger. I did not feel the need to go down there and gloat. I just felt a cold, quiet peace. I turned my back on them. I walked inside the bright room where a dozen kids were busy creating their futures. I walked over to Mike and kissed his cheek. "Who was at the gate?" he asked. "No one," I said. "Just some people who used to live here." I realized then that the sweetest revenge was not destruction. It was replacement. I had not just survived them. I had replaced their hollow legacy with a family that was real.